Zhang Jian was born into a wealthy family, but a prophecy changed his fate by saying that the family business would be ruined by his birth. The only solution would be to send him to live a simple life. Since that day, Jian lived with a very skilled monk and began to practice martial arts, determined to break the prophecy. The story begins in a temple consumed by fire. Elders and disciples try to put it out using everything they have access to. They prioritize getting people out of there. At that moment, a master merchant approaches and is paralyzed when he sees the height of the fire. He desperately asks where his son Jian and his wife are. A disciple addresses him as a leader and tries to calm him down, saying that everyone has already been safely removed from the temple. No one was injured. The man breathes a sigh of relief at this news. Suddenly an explosion happens inside the temple, and the men are thrown away. The woods were scattered all over the area. The master merchant saw all his hard work being destroyed. The scene changes to a nearby shelter. A woman tries to calm her son by saying that everything will be fine and his father will take care of everything. This boy is our protagonist, Zhang Jian. He looks at his mother with tears in his eyes, while she continues to say that everything will be fine. The next day has arrived, and we can see that there is nothing left of the temple. That merchant receives a skilled monk at home, and they talk about yesterday's incident. This merchant is the father of the protagonist, and his name is Zhang Doan. In front of him, the monk Jumo says that he came here to say something very important. He remembers mentioning earlier that he has a small ability. Zhang says that he remembers this conversation. The monk then feels comfortable talking about a prophecy he saw. He says that he has no good news related to the child's fortune. Zhang asks if he is talking about his son Jian. The monk confirms that he is. The father asks, worried if something bad will happen to him. Jumo replies that not exactly. Zhang then questions if it is something bad related to the family business. Jumo takes a deep breath and the man shouts, asking him to be clearer. The monk says that it is nothing related to Jian's life. The merchant is a little more relieved. The monk goes straight to the point and tells him that the child's poor luck is slipping away. Zhang doesn't understand anything and asks what this means. Jumo says in detail that wealth will come in, but it will be like pouring water into a broken jar. The hole in the jar is bigger than the wealth that comes in, so it's natural for fortune to dry up. The merchant is in shock and asks if in this case Jian is the reason for the hole in the jar. He understands that if this is his son, is destined to ruin the family. The monk confirms his assumption. Definitely his son will destroy the family. Zhang starts to cry, saying that this child is the thing he has waited for the most in life. Jumo interrupts the merchant's lamentations and says that he has a solution. Hope arises in Zhang's eyes. The monk says that if he entrusts the child to a high monk of great virtue and makes him learn to live a simple life, it is possible to at least partially block the hole in the jar. Zhang asks if this is true and says that Jian is his precious only son, so he doesn't intend to let the boy become a monk and end the family lineage. Jumo laughs at this answer and says he didn't come here thinking about turning his son into a monk. The goal is just to form his character, and after he turns 18, he won't have any more problems. Zhang asks if he's telling the truth. The monk replies yes, and then jokes, saying that it is quite ironic for a monk to advise not to become a monk. The merchant also laughs and says that it makes him relieved. Jumo clarifies that he knows a suitable place to entrust the child and can pick him up when the time comes. Zhang replies that he is trusting him and thanks him. The monk says that there is no reason to thank him. All this is thanks to his kindness, and they will always help him. After the conversation, the two recite some sutras. A few days pass and Jumo returns to the palace. The protagonist is held by disciples and dragged to the carriage, but he refuses to leave. The mother cries desperately, saying that Jian is only 8 years old. It is not fair that he grows away from her. Zhang tries to convince his wife that he is the best for his son. Meanwhile, Jian continues to try to free himself from men. Zhang explains to his wife that they have nothing to worry about because Master Jiang Mok personally agreed to taking care of the boy. This makes the mother even more worried because Elder Mok does not have a good reputation. His temper is enough to keep everyone away. The monk Jumo is silent, listening to the conversation. Zhang asks his wife to hold out only for 10 years. After that, he assures that Jian will return home. At that moment, the protagonist screams for his mother and begs her to help him. This makes the woman's decision even more difficult. He is dragged and holds on to the door of the carriage. The monk admires the strength of the little one. At that moment, Zhang tells his son that if he does not do this, his family will be ruined. In addition, they can be fatally punished by the heavens. So he asks his son to understand that the fate of the family is on his shoulders. Hearing this was not comfortable for the child. He just accepted fate and got into the carriage with watery eyes. but he despaired when he started to leave the palace. Meanwhile, the monk thanks the family for their trust. The scene changes to a few hours later. Jian was left on an isolated mountain. He wipes his tears while saying that he feels like an abandoned cat. Even after begging, nothing has changed. He finally understands that he has to accept reality. The boy notices a ladder next to him and sees a man at the top. Jian looks at the man and says that the reality is that he will now have to live with that skinny old monk for the next 10 years. A few minutes later, the two greeted each other and Jian sat while his master took care of the garden. The boy didn't seem happy as he remembered his father's words about his fate being cursed and that it would ruin the family. Jian feels guilty and tells himself that he doesn't want his family to be harmed. His biggest fear is that some divine punishment will fall on his parents and they will be murdered. Thinking about it, the boy says that he will be content to spend 10 years here with the monk Mok. He doesn't think it will be as bad as it seems. Meanwhile, the man continues to take care of his plants without paying attention to the child. On the other hand, Jian gets bored and says he needs to do something. He looks around and has an idea. The protagonist quickly grabs a broom and starts collecting the leaves on the ground. The monk Mok asks why he is sweeping the leaves when they will accumulate again. Jian replies that he is doing it because he felt like it. The man then replies that it won't work. There's no point in trying to impress because he won't teach martial arts. The protagonist thinks the bald man is crazy and immediately says he doesn't want to learn any of this and isn't even trying to impress. Mok feels that Jian is just playing hard and says that he is typical of a merchant's son. Then he says again that he has no intention of teaching him Shaolin martial arts. This insistence makes the protagonist angry, and he seriously says that he didn't come here to learn martial arts. The answer bothers the man, and he feels that he is being belittled by the brat. The monk Mok does not like to deal with people, and thanks to this he spent 30 years living alone on this mountain. He also refused to accept disciples claiming that he was a nuisance, and that he did not have enough skill to teach. This lasted for many years. Until last week, he was summoned by a superior monk. He told Mok that loneliness becomes unbearable when you get old, especially with no one to talk to. So he advised him to consider bringing that boy to live with him. Mok refused the proposal, initially saying that he didn't want to take care of any brats. But the monk said that it was a request and a destiny given by Buddha. It was thanks to these words that Mok he accepted to stay with the protagonist. He received the information that Jian was the son of a famous merchant, so he thought that this responsibility was in his arms because no monk wanted to deal with the boy. At that moment, Mok laughs, asking if the boy expects him to believe that he is not here to learn martial arts. The man then gets serious and questions what he came to do in the mountains. In the end, it doesn't matter what he says because his parents hope he leaves here learning martial arts, after saying that the monk turns around and says he will teach him some moves to return home. The protagonist gets angry and shouts that he is only here because they said he was cursed and had to spend 10 years with a superior monk. Mok is caught off guard. Jian adds that now he can't go home. The monk obviously doesn't believe it and thinks that they lied to the boy. He assumes that the miserable parents want to establish a connection between Jian and Shaolin, even if it means deceiving his son. At that moment, Mok hears the boy sobbing and asks him to wipe away his tears, then orders Jian to go to the bedroom and change these clothes because the look is bothering him. The protagonist asks what the problem is. Mok replies that the flashy clothes are an obstacle in the mountains. The protagonist says that it was his mother who chose these because they were the simplest. The monk tells him to stop arguing and go change. Minutes later, we see a table with leaves and some grains. Jian has already changed his clothes and asked if this is the food. Mok replies yes. In temples, the rule is to avoid the use of fire. Eating food touched by fire can make the person's temper become violent, and a monk would not be able to maintain discipline if he got angry frequently. The protagonist looks at the food without believing that he will have to eat something raw. On top of that, these clothes are so rough that they bother, even standing still. At that moment, Mok says it's time to eat. Jian asks why he gets angry so often if he eats this food every day. The monk replies that he didn't feel angry today and asks where he got it from. The protagonist soon replies that he heard his curses at him. This makes Jian believe that the monk is so hateful that he is giving him this inedible food. Mok is annoyed that his meal is being called inedible. This is the first time anyone has the courage to treat him like this. The man believes that the protagonist is provoking on purpose, but this thought comes out of his head when he sees that the boy's eyes convey innocence. Mok then takes a deep breath, understanding that it is just a curiosity. He explains that there is no need to use fire because the food tastes good even without cooking. In addition, they can save firewood. Jian is still a little skeptical and thinks that the man only does not cook because he is too lazy to go get firewood. He He then offers to fetch. It adds that he will only take the wood that is on the ground so as not to hurt anything alive in the temple. Mok can't control his anger after these words and says that just because it's on the ground doesn't mean it's a waste. Over time, the wood rots and enriches the soil.
With Global, you order anything you want and when you receive it, you celebrate it. Because that tasty grilled chicken is here and that key ingredients just in time. Order Global and we'll deliver in minutes.
Soil. So the trees grow strong. Jian is shocked by this information and asks if taking the logs means stealing food from the trees. The monk is surprised by the boy's ease of misinterpreting. The protagonist says he won't go around to get any firewood because his clothes could end up spoiling and he intends to wear it for 10 years. Mok feels that the brat is complaining about the clothes he received. His veins even pop out just thinking about it, but he takes a deep breath and asks Jian to eat. The boy obeys and asks if he can take more. The monk denies, saying that if he eats too much he will be lazy, and laziness is a spiritual sin. Night has come and it seems that the food did not do much good for the boy. He ran into the forest and could not hold back. The noise ends up waking up the monk and he realizes that Jian is putting it all out. Mok deduces that it's a result of never having raw food. A few days later, the protagonist lies down totally bewildered. He says that 2 weeks have passed and he can't control his physiological needs after eating that food. Jian wonders if he should look for some fruit on the mountain. Suddenly, the monk appears and asks if he has been hiding around. The protagonist is frightened by the sudden appearance. The man notices some bruises on his hand and says that he may end up tearing his clothes while wandering through the mountains carelessly. In addition, his shoes are already starting to wear out. Jian confesses that he left because he was too hungry. Mok replies that he is only hungry because he walks around. But the protagonist believes that it is because the portions are too small. The man disagrees. He says that people can live well by eating anything. Just believe that it is enough. Jian lowers his head and sadly replies that it is difficult to live like this. Mok says that it is more difficult to do good things and avoid sins that bring punishment. Difficulties are part of the path and he needs to adapt. The protagonist becomes sadder and sadder when he realizes that the man has no intention of helping him. Anyway, he is determined not to go hungry. At that moment, the monk turns around and starts to leave. He says he needs to do something and asks the protagonist not to leave here. Jian, he remembers the words spoken by the bald man about standing still so as not to feel hungry and decides that from today on only he goes to sleep all day. The monk looked back when he heard a noise from the boys celebrating and didn't understand anything. The protagonist feels that this is a very smart idea. Later that day, the man decided what he had to do and returned home. The scene he found was the boy sleeping all awkwardly between the sheets. Mok screams, asking why he is relaxing like a spoiled child when the sun is shining outside. This scream was enough to make the protagonist wake up scared. He immediately defends himself by saying that it was Mok who told him not to move unnecessarily. That's why he's trying to sleep. The monk takes a deep breath and says that laziness and not walking unnecessarily are two different things. Eating and sleeping all day makes him an animal wasting food. The protagonist didn't like the comparison. Mok turns around annoyed and leaves the place. The boy doesn't understand anything and wonders what he should do. A few minutes later, the monk prepares to meditate. The protagonist begins to spy from inside the room and pays attention to every detail. He wonders if Mok is reciting sutras like the other monks, then puts on his shoe and decides to see it for himself. He approaches and asks if Mok doesn't normally ring a wooden bell and reads a book aloud while reciting sutras. The man replies that he has no reason to make too much noise when one is deep in the mountains, so he reads with his eyes and beats the wooden bell with his heart. That's why it's so quiet. Jian is surprised and confesses that he finds it strange when there was no noise. The bald man asks if he thinks that singing loudly for no reason will help achieve enlightenment faster. The protagonist is annoyed by the way he speaks and mentally calls him a stingy man. He believes that the monk avoids making noise because he doesn't want to feel hungry. At that moment, Mok asks the boy to stop disturbing his meditation. Jian obeys and returns frustrated to the room. He feels that it doesn't matter what he says because in the end he will always get scolded. Suddenly a light goes on in the boy's head and he has an idea. The protagonist thinks that if he imitates everything that old man is doing, it will be better. Maybe he can get some tips if he observes how he moves little and doesn't get hungry. The next day arrives and the disciples wake up when the sun has not even risen yet. They clean the whole temple and tidy up things. At that moment the monk gets up and in an instant he organizes all the blankets. The protagonist realizes this and is shocked, thinking that it is magic. Mok looks at him and says that if he has woken up early, he should not lie down like a lazy person. After that, the man comes out and stars in him quickly arranges his sheets. He tries to imitate the man, but it gets a mess, so he just leaves the sheets the way he got and leaves. Jian begins to follow the monk and hides behind the trees so as not to be discovered. At that moment, he notices the way Mok climbs the stones, and it leaves him open-mouthed. He wonders how the man floats so lightly like that. The technique used by Mok is called Shaolin, and the boy is determined to learn, even if it means following the monk's footsteps sneakily. At that moment, the man begins to meditate. The protagonist is hidden behind one of the trees and repeats the same process. Meanwhile, in other temples, the monks and disciples also do the same process. They wake up before the sun and begin to meditate. A few hours pass, and the day has already dawned. The protagonist is still imitating the monk, and he complains about the delay. The boy deduces that the old man comes here every morning just to sleep. At that moment, Jian is betrayed by his own stomach that makes a loud noise and gives away his location. Mok says that he should at least be silent if he wants to follow him secretly. Jian replies that there is no way to avoid it because he is hungry. The monk sighs in frustration, saying that even meditating in peace is difficult. The protagonist notices a white thing come out of his mouth and goes straight to the monk's nose and asks what it is. Mok calms down, telling himself that in the end this brat is just a curious child, just like children are at his age. The man then wonders if he should explain all this to someone who is not even his disciple. The protagonist's innocent eyes end up captivating the guy, and he decides to tell a little because it's not like this technique is secret. Meanwhile, Jian stays downstairs waiting for an answer. Mok says that the practice he is doing now is a secret internal energy method called Yijin Jing, and what he saw resembling smoke is called Qi. The protagonist is surprised. Mok adds that Qi energy exists throughout the universe, and you can live a healthier life by absorbing it into your body. This information catches Jian's attention, and he deduces that this is why the old man never feels hungry, because he has been secretly absorbing Qi. All along, the monk explains that if you do this daily, you will be able to absorb it throughout your body and accumulate. After that, it becomes what martial artists call internal energy. The protagonist gets excited hearing this and mentally says that it is much easier to eat air instead of feeling hungry all the time. So he decides that he has to secretly learn how to absorb Qi like the monk does. At that moment, Mok gives him the green light to stay by his side while he does the training. But the only thing he asks is that the boy does not interfere. Jian agrees and goes back to the back of the tree. The man looks at him and has doubts if the boy gave up. The guy says to himself that he would definitely teach a Taoist technique if Jian asks something more, but it seems that he is satisfied. The monk then goes back to his training while the protagonist tries to learn how to absorb Qi. A while later, the sun starts to get stronger and the monk understands that it is enough for today. He gets up and sees that the protagonist is still there. Mok is surprised to see that Jian has perfectly executed the lotus position. It is a difficult position even for novice monks, and they usually cannot stay for half an hour. But the protagonist is like this for 2 hours, which is impressive. He observes how the boy is concentrated. Minutes later, they walk towards the house. The protagonist can barely walk and complains that his legs are hurting. He does not accept that an old man is fully intact after doing the same treatment. In addition, it seems that the monk floats instead of walking. The boy wonders scared if this bald man can be a ghost. Suddenly, Mok interrupts his thoughts and tells him to walk faster. Jian obeys and continues to admire the way the man walks, without moving his arms and with a lightness in his feet. The protagonist comes to the conclusion that Mok moves like this to avoid getting hungry. They finally get home and start eating. The protagonist thinks that today was a very good day to collect information. Before, he hadn't noticed much that the bald man doesn't waste movements in his daily actions. He spends his energy as little as possible, totally different from the employees that Jian remembers seeing in his house. Suddenly, Mok scolds him for wasting time thinking instead of eating. The boy immediately turns his attention to the meal. The monk observes confused that today the protagonist has followed him since dawn and repeated all his movements, as if imitating his actions. After eating, the two sit together at the monk's study table. Jian feels that the atmosphere has become tense and wonders what the old man is thinking. At this moment, Mok says that the book that the boy took is basically about teachings and duties for monks. It is difficult for an 8-year-old child to read alone. Jian agrees that the scripture is too difficult for him. The monk replies that he has no need to make an effort because he is not even a disciple of Buddha, so he has no obligation to learn. Jian replies that he understands. Mok admires the way the boy always answers, clearly and precisely. He thinks he may have to buy something from the brat's age, at least for him to feel more included. Soon the monk shakes his head negatively and wonders why he would do this for this child. After all, at some point he will get tired and give up reading. At that moment, Jian gets up and looks for another book on the shelf, still complaining that his legs are numb. At least now he doesn't feel so hungry. Suddenly he hears a noise outside the house and asks what the old man is doing. Mok does his daily exercise and Jian repeats the movements. The guy looks scared, wondering if this brat intends to imitate him all day because he has nothing else to do. Mok decides to make it difficult to see how far he can go. Jian loses his balance a few times because the master's movements are slow, and on the first attempt he falls to the ground. Mok smiles satisfied. He already expected the boy to fail because it is useless if he just copies this training without any base. The man continues the movements while Jian stays on the ground. He says that he must study yijinting before to be able to perform the training properly. The protagonist gets up irritated and questions if the man didn't say that it wasn't good to move unnecessarily to avoid hunger. Mok replies that this training is to keep the body healthy. It helps in the circulation of energy. The protagonist complains about not being able to keep up because he does it too slowly. The monk admires Jian's determination, but remains determined not to teach him Shaolin martial arts.